Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. And the first order of business is the presentation of the board minutes from our March 24th meeting. And it has been circulated. I would like to ask for a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Rogers, we'll turn the remainder of the agenda over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Williams. The next item is the security transaction report. And this covers the period of March 17th through April 17th. For the purchases during that time period, there were none. And then for redemptions, we had $213 million. And we had several calls during that redemption period.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'd like to ask for approval of the security transactions for the April 28th meeting.
Move it.
It's been moved.
Second.
And seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
That motion is passed. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to move on to the March swap report. And for the time period ending March 31st, 2025, Goldman Sachs Holdings was $3,959,684. This was the fair market value. And for the parking, UBS, $4,239,325, giving us an ending amount of $8,198,009. And comparing to the prior month, going back to December, the amount was $8,350,000. So we had a slight decrease in the interest rate. So it went from 4.58% to 4.23% of the 10-year Treasury.
Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the Capital 2 budget and capital improvement plan. The board is asked to endorse the FY26 capital budget totaling $1,008,921,286. It includes $125 million in general obligation bonds, and the 6-year capital improvement program for FY26 to 2030, total $5,323,884,032. And as an overview, by city charter, the Planning Commission shall submit a recommended 6-year CIP to the Board of Estimates. The Board of Estimates require this board and the Department of Finance to review and comment on the CIP. The first year of the recommended CIP being the basis of the capital budget and the ordinance of estimates to be considered by the City Council. Following this board consideration, the clerk to the board shall submit a letter of recommendation on behalf of the Board of Finance to the Board of Estimates. And so today I do have a representative of planning who will go over the 6-year capital improvement program. But before we go there, I just wanted to remind the board that we did have the PREG study, and the board did recommend, that at the December 2024 meeting, that we increase the general obligation bond from $80 million to $125 million for FY26 and 27. And Treasury has incorporated, based on the review of PRAG, to incorporate an annual review of the city's affordability limit into its formal debt management process, and will inform the Department of Planning regarding budgets for future capital projects. As the issuance amount raises, Treasury Manager will test the debt management ratios each year to ensure compliance with the recommended benchmarks. And at this point, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Palermo.
Thanks, Janelle. Good afternoon, Sarah Parnellum, Department of Planning. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Janelle just went over, but wanted to provide an overview of the FY26 capital budget and FY26 through 31 capital improvement program. So by city charter, the Planning Commission is charged with preparing a recommendation for a 6-year capital improvement program and preparing that for the Board of Estimates. And the first year becomes the budget year and is the capital component of the Ordinance of Estimates, which is adopted by the City Council. So first we'll look at the source of funds for the capital budget, the various revenue categories that make up the capital budget. So here you can see, if you can go forward. Slide 4. Yep.
Would you go back to the prior slide?
Sure. One more. Do you want to go one more back?
Page 2.
Page 2.
Wait, where's some?
Just by city charter. Yep. Did you have a question?
Let me ask if I could, because out of ignorance, this is a plan of finance. How does that work in terms of how you interact with the Department of Finance?
So before, did you want to start? Did you want to answer that?
No, please, go ahead.
At the outset of the budget process, before the Department of Planning prepares recommendations, we get from the Department of Finance targets for the general funds, for the highway user revenue, and for the general obligation bonds.
So
And so
you get the money available before you start out?
we know how much to be planning for.
Okay. So for that process, then you fill in the programs that the money available is to be applied for.
Correct, and we make adjustments
So the
as,
money available basically came from Mr. Moyesef. Got
yes.
it. All right.
And then part of this body's review is making sure that we stayed within those available amounts. So that the Department of Planning and the Planning Commission is recommending something that is indeed within the available amounts,
Right. Thank you.
which I believe it is. And we update that as we get new information. So should there be a change during the time that we're preparing the budget, we get updates from finance and we make updates accordingly. This year, we did have, some updates, through the planning process. And so we made those changes. All right, so back on slide 4, we have a breakdown by revenue category. You can see for all 6 years of the 6-year program what the recommendations are by revenue category, and these are organized into several different categories of revenue. So we have local discretionary funds, which includes our general fund. This is PAYGO capital. This is funding from today's budget. And then we also have debt sources. So we have 4 different kinds of general obligation bonds. We also have highway user revenue. These are funds that we get from the state specifically for mostly transportation-related projects. We have federal and state funds, which often come with strings attached and are for very specific purposes. And then we have the utility revenue that supports public works for water, wastewater, and stormwater, and then a couple of other funds. And so, yes.
I'm going to take this opportunity to do a follow-up question to Bob's that is where I was going to go anyway. I was surprised to see what seemed to be a pretty significant drop-off in years 4, 5, and 6 compared to years 1, 2, and 3. And it occurred to me that this was a good time to ask, you get targets for the coming fiscal year from the finance department. Do you get targets for all 6 years from finance?
To the extent that we can have information about it, and it's only for certain fund sources. So for the general fund highway user revenue, yes, we did get a 6-year target from
Okay.
finance, and that is where you're seeing that big drop off starting in year 3. That is because unless there's a change in legislation, the highway user revenue that the city receives is going to drop off dramatically.
Right.
So it is reflecting that. So that's what that's based on.
That's right. The Finance Department and the Planning Department work very closely together to basically keep this live and current. Obviously, everything that's out in those further years is subject to state and federal appropriation and a lot of uncertainty. But this represents the latest and best in our joint knowledge of what can be counted on in the out years.
Well, can I ask a question about the chart that you have?
Yes.
I noticed that in terms of the general fund, you're going from, that's available from capital, you're going from 55 million in '26 to 15 million in 2031. And then in terms of the bonds, the reverse is true. So I'm gathering that what you're doing, and I think it's, let me explore it, is you're attempting to substitute bonding for revenue so you can use the revenue for other purposes? Can you, any of it, it jumps out that you're going from 55 million to 15 million under the capital. You know, it's a reverse.
I actually think I can maybe better answer that. It's not exactly that. There are two things happening here. One is that there is an effort from the city to slowly over time increase GO borrowing. That was reflected in the Prague study. Those were the scenarios that we had tested out. This coming year represents the first year of that increase, and the intention is for there to be other increases as we slowly move our GO up to an eventual level that you don't quite see here yet of hopefully $200 million by the time you get to 2035, which we feel would be a more sustainable level for our overall capital program. So that is the goal. That means we're going to work very diligently within the budget process to make sure that we are able to sustain that debt service in a balanced way. And so you see that increase in borrowing. At the same time, that first line is just PAYGO. And PAYGO really boils down to how much we have available at a given moment for critical projects and prioritizing those projects. We rarely do much PAYGO in the further out years because there's simply too little known about 2031 to assign PAYGO to it at this time. That is not necessarily to say that we won't have PAYGO out there. If you looked at a chart like this 6 years ago, it would have probably shown a pretty small PAYGO amount for 2026. But as we get here and we have specific projects in mind and specific sources of funding we can attribute to those projects, then we put that funding in.
Well, Michael, I had thought that possibly the reason that you wanted to bond capital projects rather than general revenue is you wanted to use some of the general revenue to reduce the property tax.
That is absolutely part of the consideration, and I'm very happy to say for the general public that we now have a plan for continuing the reductions in property tax that had been started under Mayor Rawlings Blake and under our 10-year financial strategy. We're very excited to announce that we will be targeting getting the rate down under $2 for owner-occupied properties. All of those things will be part of the consideration as we look to budget 2027, 2028, 2031. We will make those decisions about whether or not a project needs funding right then and there that the capital plan can't quite sustain and absolutely needs GO. That's why I'm not quite prepared to rule it out. Or if it doesn't, and if there is room there, it's going to be part of our broader budget discussions, including alongside all of our other goals, a goal to over time reduce the property tax rate.
Okay, but the short answer is if you bond more capital projects, there's more general revenue that's available for other uses.
I think that's part of the answer. The reason I keep caveating is that I don't want to make it sound like how much the city spends on capital is or should be flat. I think that one of our goals is to lower the property tax rate, but one of our other goals is to maintain the physical plant of the building so that we don't have escalating costs in the long term that will end up costing us more. So there are dual goals here to both grow the capital program over time and to reduce the property tax rate.
I thought that's what I said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And if I could just, maybe from a slightly different vantage point, answer that. So typically, we think of the PAYGO for capital having a baseline of $15 million a year, and what you're seeing in FY '26 is an increase over that baseline. So it's not that we have a higher level that's being reduced as we go down to 2031, it's that we have a baseline that is increased for the first year because we have one-time sources of funding that are available. So that's how I would think of it in terms of that higher level that you're seeing for FY '26. It's not that it's shrinking in future years, it's that it's higher than typical in FY '26. It is a little bit higher in the years after that, in the 22 to 27 million range. That's really one particular project that's driving that.
Well, can I have a couple of other questions? On the money spent for community and economic development, I noticed that there's a significant decrease in that, and I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So in addition to the funds that are reflected in the capital improvement program, the city is also undertaking a $3 million vacancy initiative. I think it has a new name, Reframe. Do I have that right? Reframe Baltimore. And so that is happening parallel to this 6-year, capital improvement program. So as we scale up in terms of the vacancy initiative, that's going to be addressing a lot of the community and economic development needs. And so we're using the capital improvement program to focus on some of our infrastructure needs that do not have other sources of funding and addressing some of our.
So you have offsetting revenues, what you're saying.
Yes.
Can I have one more?
As many as you want.
When
I'm
I
not the
go
chair.
down-
You should ask the chair.
If we go down to utility revenue, which we have some bonds that we're going to vote on today, I'm curious as to because the revenue looks like it's constant. It's roughly the same amount every year.
Mm-hmm.
But the amount spent for capital varies a lot, going up to a total of almost double 2 years from now with the same amount of revenue. So I'm wondering what the coverage is, if you've calculated the coverage calculations for those out for this year and for the next year and for the next year.
And I'm actually, we luckily have representatives from DPW here, so I'm going to defer to them to answer your question more thoroughly than I probably could.
Oh, I'm just warming my hands.
Did you get the question?
Yes. So good
That's not
afternoon.
a sign of hostility.
Well, I'm used to it from this guy. Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Moore, Chief Financial Officer, Department of Public Works. So basically, it really depends on the projects that are occurring. So, for example, we may be doing the egg-shaped digesters, which are $90 million. We do have affordability targets that we follow each and every year for each fund. So depending on where those projects are, when we push them out, sometimes we may phase them, delay them. So those numbers do kind of vary year to year and change in the out years. The most important thing is that we monitor our projects by cash flow. So we go to market regularly for those regular amounts. So although the dollars may change over time in appropriations because of how much the projects cost, it's the cash flow that is consistent.
What I'm wondering is if you have a projected debt service calculation
Yes.
ratio.
Yes. So we do
have
our
that
debt
on
service
these-
coverage
For
ratios.
these 3 years, you have that? To me, when we go into the market, your revenue's exactly the same, but we're going to double the amount of bonds outstanding 2 years hence. How
So,
much does the what's the revenue calculation?
yeah, so I think I
buyer's
want to
gonna-
draw a distinction between appropriation and then actual cash flow and revenue. So what we actually get from the market is bond funds and actual dollars that we spend through cash flow each year. So we're not actually borrowing that amount of money. We're financing our projects on a more stable basis. So as I mentioned, that can change year to year for appropriations, because we might have a $90 million project, but the project may only cost $10 million each year. So that's kind of the foundation. And so we also do have the debt service coverage ratios, which we project, but we do that based on the incremental or level of borrowing that we do. That will be the increment in our debt
Are we
service.
going to get that when we vote on the bonds today?
I don't believe that's included here, but it is included in our rates presentation, and we can provide you with some supplemental data for that. Because we do project what we will borrow each year within our rate calculations.
Yes, sir.
I think what Bob is referring to is that the information that you provided to the Board of Estimates around adjusting water rates would be relevant to the Board of Finance when approving the individual bonds. And would it be possible, working forward, to make sure that that information is packaged with the information that the Board of Finance receives when it's considering bonds?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We have amortization tables that figure into all that.
Do you need it for this one today?
I think not.
We'll make sure you get it.
I think the important thing is the out years where you're doubling it.
Yes, absolutely.
Actually, if I just want to ask a question about the county's grant for capital. Where does that money come from?
Actual cash from the county. So we borrow for the city, if you will. The county borrows for the county and gives us the cash for their percentage of the cost of the project.
Okay, so if we know we're going to be spending more in an out year, we can project getting more because that's going to be their share of the project.
Yes,
Okay.
engineers decide each percentage of each project based on the flows through the system in advance. And yes,
I was just curious because a lot of in a lot of cases on this chart, numbers drop off in the out years because we don't have any certainty. So you don't want to overproject. I get that, but it was just odd that the county's grant goes back up in year 6, and I wasn't sure why you felt comfortable that that would happen, because you know that that's when you're going to be doing big projects that the county will have to provide
Exactly.
its share for. I got you.
all
Okay.
depends on the projects. Yeah.
All right, so this, but with the revenue bonds, there's a peak in year 3, and then a significant drop-off, and that's because we're going to be purposely doing fewer projects?
I wouldn't say that per se. I think one of the things I want to highlight is the out years are still moving for us based on that cash flow. So for example, although it peaks right now, we may decide to move a project next year or.
I'm doing that thing where, I'm sorry, this is, I'm doing the thing where, like, I only tell you part of what I'm thinking. I should just tell you all of it at the beginning. That's on me, I'm sorry. It's going back to the conversations that we had around the rate increases, that the Board of Estimates already approved. My understanding from that was those increases were going to fund significant increased spending. And since the utility revenue line is pretty flat, I was assuming that increased revenue was going to be providing debt service for bonds, but I would have thought, unless you're planning on reversing the rate increase and charging less, which seems, shall we say, statistically unlikely, I would expect revenue bonds to, at the very least, plateau, if not continue to slowly go up. And so that rather significant cratering in year 5 is concerning.
So I would say this, those projects, those numbers are bunched up in that year. And as we continue to plan, because we can only borrow a certain amount based on our projections, so those projects will be distributed over those years, if that makes sense.
So you're saying years 2 and 3 and 4 that are all greater than
Yeah.
1 will eventually smooth into a more gradual upward trend as opposed to what looks like.
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
And I would also add that the debt service will look a lot smoother than the actual capital, right?
Yeah.
You're entering into a big batch of projects, then you will pay some flat amount of debt service on those projects, and it's the debt service that's supported by the utility rates. So this kind of shows the entry point into those projects, but on the operating side of the ledger, it looks a lot smoother.
Okay.
Yeah,
the
as I
revenue's
mentioned, I just want to
the
draw that
The
distinction
projected
between
revenue's the same.
appropriation and actual cash flow. So for example,
the
if a
rates
project
have gone
costs
up-
100
have
million,
gone up.
you might see 100
You're
million in
appropriating the
20
whole
The-
project
the
up
rates-
front.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to do that
Level of borrowing.
different, like,
Well, the city does it a little bit differently than the utility side.
I'm sorry, I missed.
I-
I just wanted to clarify
Okay.
something for, the line that says utility revenue is not the total of utility revenue. That is utility revenue that's being used for PAYGO capital. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. I'm not sure if it was. And then I can try and answer your question, Comptroller.
no, I think I'm going to withdraw my question.
Okay.
Okay. I'm worried that we might have too many different conversations going on at once, and we'll stick with that one. We'll stick with this track for a while. I can have that conversation later. Okay.
I just want to make sure that when Bob asked the question about the debt service schedule, and you shifted him towards seeing it more when bonds were being issued, I just want to make sure that we are really addressing the correct concern. And the reason I'm asking that is we go through this presentation every year, annually. We see the same schedule, but if that question is going to come back the same time next year,
I think his question was less about the 6-year CIP and more about the bonds, the bonds that we're approving afterwards, right?
What I'm interested in is the debt service, projected debt service calculation.
Oh, just in
for the
general.
bonds we're approving today.
Yeah,
Oh.
That's
yeah,
what I'm
right.
interested in.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, that's different.
that's what's
I
relevant
didn't pick that up.
in terms of today's agenda.
Yeah,
So,
those were included in our model.
And that's,
What you've assured me
Yeah.
is that the Board of Estimates has those figures.
Yes.
And it's sufficient so that we're not paying a premium on the bonds.
Yes.
Which is the reason for my question.
yes.
so I didn't know that Bob had jumped ahead of us.
He's like that. He's like the wind.
You know what,
Yeah.
ain't it so? Duly noted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this chart of the revenues by revenue category? All right. We also have a graphic version. I think sometimes, it's easier to see these things visually. So you can see that in green, we have the lion's share of the funding, which is supporting the utilities. So these are the revenue bonds that we were just talking about, as well as the utility revenue, PAYGO capital, and the contributions from the counties, all supporting the utilities. In purple, you'll see those local discretionary sources. So you'll see the general funds, PAYGO capital, as well as the GEO bonds. In yellow, you'll see the highway user revenue, and then in blue, you'll see the state and federal grants. And so you can see that there's only, even though it's $1 billion budget, there's only about a third of it that we have, local flexibility over, less than a third.
Well, I assume that some of the federal grants are at risk and maybe the state grants?
Yes, we're still getting information about that. We are, so this reflects, the recommendations for the Board of Finance reflect what the Planning Commission approved back in mid-March. What we're going to be submitting to the Board of Estimates to vote
But
on
subject to change.
May 7th includes a few changes where we're going to be pulling back a couple of the federal grants. So far, we don't think any of the formula funds are at risk. So the Federal Highway Administration funds, the CDBG, the home funds, as of right now, those are still planned for. And then here you can see the patterns of those various revenue categories over time. So one thing I want to call your attention to, you were talking about, Comptroller, about the total falling off, with year 4, and I was mentioning that the highway user revenue funds drop off. You can see that the yellow, while visible in years 1 and 2, really becomes almost invisible in years 3 through 6. You can also see the variability of those utility projects and how they really contribute to the lumpiness of the capital budget. The next slide is showing you just the trends for the GEO-bonds over time. So as Janelle mentioned in the introduction, this body approved an increase in the loan authorization up to $125 million in FY26 and 27 from $80 million, which is where we were for several years. And then you can see the stair steps up for the next couple of years as we're working to increase the level of GEO bonds in the capital budget. And then you can see similarly the history for highway user revenue funds. So you can see the total highway user revenue here, and then the portion in yellow is the capital portion of the highway user revenue. So you can see that we are in a temporary peak. So that $94 million in FY26, we're also going to be at $90 million, projected to be at about $90 million for capital next year, and then we come crashing down to 25, 21, 16 million. Any questions on the revenues? All right, so then we can turn our attention to the use of funds. So here you can see a breakdown by agency for FY26 through 31. And if we go one more slide forward, you can again see this visually. You'll see some of the same patterns that you saw when we were looking at the revenue categories. You can see the utilities are the largest share in green. Transportation is the next largest share. This is because they have a lot of those Federal Highway Administration funds, as well as some competitive state and federal grants. And then Department of Housing and Community Development is the next largest allocation, and again, that's because they also are not relying just on local funds. They receive state and federal funds in significant amounts. The agencies that are reliant on the local funds really are the agencies with the smaller allocations. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the allocation by agency over time through the 6-year program. This next slide shows you visually what I was mentioning in terms of which agencies are really reliant on the local funds. So you can see, the Baltimore City Information Technology, for example, all of their capital funding is coming from local sources, whereas the Department of Public Works, which is the third one from the top, you can see that only a very small fraction of the funds, and that's really just for solid waste, are coming from local sources. So you can see how that...
I'm not second guessing this, but I just wonder why so much of the budget is spent for parks.
This is not the total amount of funding by agency. This is the percent that's local. So Recreation and Parks gets a lot of local funding, but they also get state funding. So that's why you're seeing that bar that's pretty far extended on this chart. It's showing a large portion is local funding, and then some of their funding is from the state.
Also, my recollection from the briefing we had the other day was that it's actually not mostly going to parks, it's mostly going to recreation, because we have a pretty substantial portfolio of rec centers that haven't been upgraded or updated in generations. And so,
Makes sense.
and we also are building some brand-new rec centers in some places that never had them. So that really probably ups the cost.
And some of that's with ARPA funding.
Yeah.
But yes, but there are those new investments. And then I wanted to just share a few highlights from the FY26 capital budget. So included in the FY26 recommendations is funding for constructions of both Phase 1 and Phase 2 for the future East Side Transfer Station. So that's improvements to the administrative offices as well as the compost facility. We have more than $10 million in local funding and $20 million in state funding for impact investment areas. And this is a big increase from just 2 years ago when it was only $2 million in local funding. For sidewalk repairs, we have $12 million, more than $12 million for sidewalk reconstruction in FY26. And again, compared to 2 years ago, this was only $1.5 million. We also included in FY26 and the subsequent years, we have $12 million for the partial ADA consent decree. That's on top of the increased funding for sidewalk reconstruction.
I noticed that you have figures for everything else, but not the facilities for the homeless.
We have, off of memory, I think it's $18 million for 18 million. I can double check that, but I think it's 18 million for the homeless service facilities. I don't have a comparison for that one from previous years because there wasn't funding in FY24 for homeless service facilities. That's not a recurring item like some of these others that are recurring.
Well, I noticed when I go back by the Basilica, there's a whole colony that's there. Are those people going to be included?
So the city has been leasing, renting, I don't know quite what the space at hotels, and we are contemplating purchasing a hotel for housing homeless persons.
Well, I just noticed that you don't have a number there, and I.
There is a number in the CIP. I think it's 18 million, but I will look it up for you.
That sounds good.
I don't want to jump in if you're about to talk at length about the percent for public art. But I have a question about that.
I was going to say that it's $1 million for public art, and that this is a new line item. So in the past, the agencies have had kind of this very, complex 1%, but only for these eligible projects and these eligible fund sources, and it may or may not have actually made it into art projects. And so we're trying a new approach, and we have put in a line item dedicated $1 million for public art in the FY26 budget.
So the law that's on the books right now requires 1% for public art, and $1 million is neither 1% of the total amount that we're spending on capital, nor even just the general funds and GO bonds part. That is definitely the city's money that we are providing directly. So it seems like it would be inappropriate to purposefully appropriate a number that is less than what the law on the books requires.
Yeah, we were looking particularly at the public infrastructure GO bonds because I don't think the current law applies to all of the GO bonds. I don't think it applies to the schools. I don't think it applies to the community and economic development. I'm not sure about affordable housing. So we were looking particularly at the public infrastructure, and this exceeds 1% of the public infrastructure
But if it
geobonds.
applies to public infrastructure, then it would apply to the water and wastewater bonds.
So the language, and again, I will defer to our colleagues at DPW, but I believe the language says sort of at the discretion of the Director of Public Works. So it's not mandated in the current law. But again, you're asking me these things from memory, so I would prefer to look it up and get back to you, but that's what I believe.
Okay, I just want to make sure that there is a clear, trackable rationale, because there are advocates for
Certainly.
the use of the 1% for public art who have been unhappy with the city's inability to regularly follow that law. And I think that having a clear budget line that is just there will remove a lot of that uncertainty and confusion, but we need to be able to demonstrate that that budget line equals 1% of what we're spending on construction, and all the different loopholes and exceptions are going to need to be very clearly articulated, and we're going to be able to we need to show
Yeah.
how that all ends up being $1 million. And I have to tell you, it would be incredibly coincidental if out of this budget it should turn out that we are spending exactly $100 million of eligible expenses on capital money, such that the appropriation is exactly $1 million.
Well, just to speak to it for a moment, we absolutely intend to follow the law in the sense of spending at least 1%. The reason that it's such a round number is because it slightly exceeds 1%, and the idea here was to have something clean and something predictable and something that isn't necessarily just at the bare minimum. It's part of our programmatic proposal here, essentially, is to have this 1 million. So we'll absolutely go. Our planning department will go back and check on the law. But yeah, this we weren't shooting for exactly 1%. We were shooting for meeting the law and then slightly exceeding it in a way.
So the actual number is less than $1 million.
That is correct.
Wow.
My understanding is that the math of what we had to do under the law previously was under $1 million. And we were also consistently struggling to actually do that because of the very complex nature of project assignment. So this is kind of increasing in two ways. This is making it a lot simpler to give out the money, but it's also actually increasing the pot from something slightly under $1 million to a nice round $1 million.
The public infrastructure geobonds are 62.5 million, so that would be 625,000. But a portion of the general fund revenue would also trigger the percent for public art, so it ends up somewhere less than $1 million, I think, but more than 625,000. But I'll get you a more detailed answer.
I mean, I would assume it would have to be all of the general fund.
I'm not sure all of them would be eligible. I'll take a look.
Because am I remembering correctly that a lot of the general fund money ends up being our match when, other funding revenue requires a local match for some type of project? I remember we had a streetscape project on York Road that was a $5 million project, and we were very excited about the idea of $50,000 of public 1% money for public art, and then we were informed that it was $4 million of the $5 million was a federal grant, and $1 million was local funds that were the match.
Yeah, some of
For
it,
the-
some of
correct.
it probably is in that category.
Yeah, so what we got was just the 1% of the million that was local money.
Got it.
And so we got a $10,000 public art grant. So, okay, I got you, I'll get you. All right, I'll wait for the.
I'll prepare a more detailed answer for you. You asked about recreation and parks, and so there are significant investments in FY '26. So we're programming funding to be able to award contracts that currently have some funding for these projects, but not enough to award them. And I'm hoping this doesn't change with our current economic climate, but we have a whole series of projects that we're hoping to be able to award with this funding, as well as design funding for Lillian Jones Recreation Center. And then we're also funding the acquisition for the Highlandtown to Greektown connector segment for the Greenway Trail. So those are all highlights from FY '26, and there are also some highlights for the outer years of the capital improvement program. So for FY '27 through '31, we are funding a new Northeast Police District station. In FY '27, we're funding the local match for West Baltimore United. So that is one of the things that's going to change from what the Board of Finance is seeing compared to what the Board of Estimates is going to see on May 7th. We had the federal funding in FY '26 initially. We're pushing that back to FY '27. But we're still making sure that we're programming the local match for that project.
Well, I was pleased to see that you're replacing the air conditioning in the courthouse, because I'd heard they were going to leave the courthouse and try to have a building elsewhere, which I thought would be a terrible mistake.
So if a decision is made for them to leave, then we will reprogram these funds. But as of right now, that is the intention.
Who's going to make the decision whether you're going to leave or not?
The mayor. Let's just leave it there.
Okay.
The mayor.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big building.
Yeah.
We are looking to do demolition of some of the surplus schools that the city is responsible for. We have a growing inventory of surplus schools. We have systemic improvements at the Abel Bowman Building next door. We have the third phase of the East Side Transfer Station. So I mentioned phases 1 and 2 are funded in FY '26. The third phase, which is the transfer station itself, is funded in FY '31. And then we have renovation of Edmondson High School. And then in terms of some parks highlights, we have funding for North Hartford Park for the construction of Lillian Jones Recreation Center, following that design, improvements to Druid Hill Park Reservoir, Nathan Irby Park, Madison Square Nathan Irby Park, and the dome renovation, as well as several pools.
Is that the formal name of the park, Madison Square Nathan Irby Park?
That's what I was given.
Okay. I was trying to remember from when it was created, and I have in my head this Oriole Park in Camden Yards model of Nathan Irby Park in Madison Square. But I don't know. I don't know whether that was just something that was being joked about at the event, or if that was an actual thing. But that might resolve what would otherwise be a oddly uncomfortable name.
Yeah, which is why I shortened it when I was reading it. I can find that out. So that's what I have. Are there any other questions?
Good work.
Any other questions? And if there are no questions, we would like to entertain a motion for the approval of the capital budget application.
Move to approve the capital budget.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks. And it is 18 million for the homeless service facilities.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, we actually have three financings for the Department of Public Works. And to your question, Mr. Shelton, all these projects have gone, Public Works have a financial advisor that models their debt and their expenses. So all of these projects has gone through their modeling. It also gauges anticipated revenue as well as what the coverage ratio is for the debt.
I'd just be happy to, good for us to have it when we vote on it.
Okay. All right. So,
Not to worry about today.
thank you very much. Okay, so the first one on the agenda is the wastewater projects. So we provided you a Board of Finance resolution, and in that resolution, we're asking you to approve two projects there. One, no more than $6 million of subordinate project revenue bonds for the 2025A, and also for $10,600,000, no more than of that in subordinate revenue bonds for the 2025B, and the interest rate not to exceed 5%. We also ask you to approve the supplemental resolution, number 37. It's between the Mayor and City Council and M&T Bank as trustee. And we also ask you to approve the private placement to the Maryland Infrastructure Financing Administration, and as well as appoint M&T as the trustee, registrar, and paying agent for the bonds. So we've regularly used the state of Maryland MDE to fund these projects, which is a lower cost of debt cost to us. At this time, we use the index of the GEO bond index, and the rate will be around, we're asking you to approve not to exceed 5%. We know that rate is going to be lower than that based on the index. The city routinely takes advantage of the state revolving fund as a disadvantaged community. The city is afforded an affordable rate below the market, and is rated at 25% of the bond buyers' 11 GEO bond index. And right now that is going for about 1.25% of the when we last looked at the index. The bonds shall be advertised no more than 5%. They charge us 4.7% for administrative fees for us to use the fund. And once these bonds have been approved, they'll be issued under the 2002 amended restated wastewater bond resolution, was approved by the board back in April of 2002. So in here we have two projects that were being funded through this offering. It's the sanitary sewer collections system improvement for the Jones Falls Sewell Glen Avenue subbase, and the other projects, the small diameter sewer main replacement in Roland Park. The debt will be amortized at a 30-year term, and we're pledging the revenue from the wastewater enterprise system. So I'm asking the board to approve this financing for water wastewater.
Are there any questions? There's a lot of materials that were already circulated. Bob, any question you're okay with?
I'm fine.
Okay. With that, I would then ask for a approval of the resolution and the authorization for the issuance.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And the next item on the agenda is the water projects. And we're asking the same thing for, at this point, the project is to exceed no more than $3.3 million of the 2025A. And the second one is the 2025B of $3.7 million. The wastewater is a principal forgiveness loan, We're asking the board to approve the 24th supplemental bond resolution, and as well as the private placement with the Maryland Infrastructure Finance Administration, and to have M&T serve as trustee and registrar and paying agent for the bonds.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I did have a question. I meant to ask this for the first, but is M&T our trustee, registrar, and paying agent for the bonds automatically because they're our depository, or is this a separate thing?
It's automatically, well, it's a separate contract.
It's a separate contract?
Yes.
So when do they bid on that contract?
So it's part of the, well, it's a separate contract that we continuously use M&T Bank. We have not put it out to bid to any other bank.
Yeah, no, that's not the best answer. Okay, all right, then we'll take the rest of that conversation offline and talk about how we can, see about making that something where we do. I assume we pay them, or is this free? Is this a free
No,
service?
no.
Is it, if they're making money off of it, then we have to find a way to make that a open, transparent process for how we select them. Okay.
Again, is there a motion, again, for the resolution, the authorization, and the issuance of the water subordinate project?
Move it.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the last one is for the stormwater, asking for the same authorization. We have two projects here for the 2025A, not to exceed $5.6 million, and 2025B, not to exceed $2.5 million. The 2025B is a principal forgiveness loan. This will be the sixth supplemental resolution, and we're asking this to be a private placement with the Maryland Water Quality, as well as for M&T to serve as trustee, registrar, and paying agent for the bonds.
Any questions? Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any other matters to be brought before the board today?
There's no other business?
And with there being no other business, we'll just mention again that the next meeting is
See how cooperative we are?
May 19th.
I had 5 more questions, but, sorry.
A motion for adjournment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Unanimous consent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.